Welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz, a show where we discuss happenings in this, the most fertile spot on the planet for new ideas. I'm your host, Seth Shostak, and tonight, outer space. Well, if not outer, at least space. We're going to be talking to the Mountain View resident who wrote the sci-fi sensation, The Martian. And we're going to ask him how he did it, and, could it be that an astronaut could get stranded on the red planet the way he describes? It's my pleasure to be speaking with Andy Weir. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Seth. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, look, the past couple of months, it's got to have been like, I don't know, walking out your door and facing a blizzard or something. The movie version of your book, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Matt Damon and all, that's been nominated for, what I found, was 135 awards.
Wow, really?
And so far, it's won 26 of them.
Okay.
I hope you're driving a better car these days. Are you living large with the Hollywood glitterati now?
No, mostly it's just me and my cats. Not a very exciting life. Just the other day I stayed up as late as like 10 p.m. It was pretty wild.
Do people recognize you on the streets at least?
Sometimes they do if they've been to an event that I spoke at, because they recognize me from that. But just kind of out in the wild, if they've never seen me in person, it's kind of cool to be a writer because no one really knows what you look like.
I see. Okay. So, well, all right. Now, of course, you wrote the book upon which the film is based. How much were you involved with the making of the film? Did they have you down on the set and all?
My main job on the film was to cash the check. I feel like I did a fairly good job at that. When Drew Goddard was writing the adaptation, he called me pretty much every day, but mostly just for like scientific clarifications and just to double check the math on things to make sure it was like scientifically accurate. He's a very creative guy. He didn't need any help in that direction, and he was really interested in making a faithful adaptation of the story. So I was really happy with the way the screenplay turned out.
But did you have? He passed this all by you, right? You got to read it beforehand.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I didn't have any say. Yeah. I had no authority whatsoever. They chose to include me, but they could have just wandered off and done their own thing without caring what I had to say at all.
So they optioned the book to make the movie, and at that point, your control over the material is
gone.
Goner.
You sell them the movie rights; they can do whatever they want.
Okay, but I have to say, having both read the book and seen the film, I thought the film was pretty true to the book.
Oh yeah, I'm so happy with how that turned out.
Really? Yeah. Now, of course, in a 90-minute, 2-hour film, I think the film was probably...
It was like 2:21, I think.
That's a long film.
Almost 2.5 hours, yeah.
Even so, there were, big sections of the book that had to be excised or shortened or abbreviated in some way. And I felt that was a bit of a shame. Everybody says the book's better than the movie.
That's the standard thing everyone says, right?
Particularly goats who are chewing on both. But yeah... But I think I'm not trying to give you a gratuitous compliment here, but I really do think that the book was better because there was more detail. There was a lot more.
Well, they had to remove some stuff or the movie'd be 5 hours long, right? So something had to go. And I think the stuff they removed was pretty good. If it had been up to me, I would have come up with the same cuts. So
Really? Okay, now, without offering too many spoilers, some are going to be inevitable, but let's talk a little bit about your storyline here. Fundamentally, it's about a future expedition to Mars. When I say future, when is this supposed to take place?
Like 2035 is when it takes place. Late 2035 is when the story starts.
Okay, but that's not unrealistic at all. If you ask people at NASA headquarters, when are we going to have people on Mars? They'll say 2030s, right?
Yeah, I think it's a little optimistic. I think realistically, in the real world, our first manned mission to Mars will probably be maybe 2050. But
really?
Yeah.
Are you signed up?
No. I write about brave people. I'm not one of them. I'm an earthbound misfit for life.
Okay, but this isn't 2 people or 3 people going to Mars. Right. This is a large expedition, and presumably not the first time people have set foot on the red planet, or
you mean within the story?
Within the story.
Yeah, it's the third mission to Mars, manned mission to Mars, and each mission had 6 people. Okay. So these are the 13th through 18th people to set foot on the planet.
And they're going there not just to, plant a flag in the ground and salute it. They're going there, to set up shop, right?
Well, they're setting up. They're there for scientific purposes. They're there to study the planet and study the geology, the chemistry of the soil. The protagonist was actually there to run plant life experiments to see if plants could grow in Martian soil, and he ended up needing to do a lot more of that than he'd planned.
Mark Watney.
Yes, Mark Watney, the protagonist.
Is there anything autobiographical about Mark Watney?
Well, no, I've never been stranded on Mars myself, but.
There's still time.
His personality is definitely based on my own. I mean, I'm a snarky smartass myself, and but he's just kind of all the parts of my personality that I like, and none of the parts that I don't like. So it's kind of the idealized me, and I think you'll see that a lot in fiction. The main character is always somebody the author wants to be, or someone the author wants to have sex with.
Yeah. Well,
for the record, I want to be Watney. Yeah. So
okay. All right.
Let's clear that up.
I mean, but some writers talk about their characters as developing their own life, at least in their heads, that their characters begin to speak to them. But in your case, if it's based mainly on you, I guess that wasn't such a shock.
Well, yeah, he did kind of have a life of his own, though. You get a rhythm going, and it's really nice. You don't have to think, oh, what would the character do? You're just like, boom, I know what this character will do because I know them backward and forward, and things get moving along really nice. That's a great feeling, but usually it's just a lot of hard work.
Okay, now this guy is, he's technically competent. He knows, his salvation is science, right? Mm-hmm. And
engineering.
And engineering, right? And that's not the kind of thing that would have made a very successful film back when I was a kid. I mean, the scientists then were all little bald-headed guys in white lab coats running around. We got to save the monster.
Back when you were a kid, you mean like the early talkies, or
no? This was a Civil War. But
okay, yeah, the ones where you have to crank the thing.
Yeah,
okay,
you have to crank the cameras.
No, yeah, I think there's been a trend lately in the past 20 years or so, like geek chic, like nerds and scientists and engineers and stuff have become cool over the last 20 years, and I think this is kind of a pessimistic view on human nature for me to say it, but I think it's because engineers are now making a lot of money. So it used to be, like, if you were a scientist or an engineer, if you were an engineer, if you were a nerd or a geek or something like that in the 1950s, maybe you'd get a job as an engineer working for GE or Westinghouse or something like that. You'd make about the same as a blue-collar worker. You'd sit at a drafting table all day. You'd go home. You'd have a nice, kind of middle-class life. But now engineers, especially with the tech industry and whatnot, suddenly are making like 4 or 5 times the mean income. And so when you have this huge demographic of people who are now suddenly skewing toward the wealthier side of the scale, then all of a sudden their interests and hobbies become considered cool by society.
I think my generation merely regrets that this has happened so late because, in high school, the women would never look at you if you were a geeky type.
Yeah, well, I grew up, when I was in high school, it was the 80s, and that geeks are cool thing had not set in yet.
I feel some resentment. All right, well
so do I.
Let's get back to this storyline here. Mm-hmm. All right, so this crew, 6 people, half dozen people, they're on Mars and on the Red Planet, and they're building a habitat, some sort of high-tech shelter there. When a massive windstorm forces them to abandon their efforts, climb in their rocket, and head back to Earth, leaving one guy behind whom they assume is dead,
yep.
Right? Okay, so it becomes a battle of survival, because the guy's not dead. That would have shortened the film considerably.
Yeah, and he died, the end.
Yes, right. Okay.
2 hours of funeral after that. Yeah.
Well, I can dig it. So it becomes a battle of survival, one man against the elements, hoping for rescue. Now this, of course, reminded me, and I'm sure many people, of Tom Hanks in Castaway.
Or Tom Hanks in Apollo 13.
Also.
Take your pick.
Oh, yeah, that hadn't occurred to me. Okay, except that, Mars is not just another small island in the ocean, and he doesn't have a soccer ball and all that stuff. But there's a problem here, the storyline with one abandoned guy, because you can't have a lot of dialogue there, so let alone love interest, right? I mean, wasn't that a problem writing a book?
No, it was really easy because he's an astronaut, and so he records and everything that he does. And so he has these log entries, and the whole book is told first person through his log entries. Well, not the whole book, but most of it. All the segments that are taking place on Mars are first person by Mark, which is great because he's this, inveterate smartass, and so he's like, I get to be as funny as I want narrating and describing what's going on, which is good because I had to do a lot of exposition. I had to explain science and technology concepts that the reader can't be just assumed to know. And it would have read like a Wikipedia article if I didn't have a really funny main character to voice it.
Yeah, but it doesn't read like a Wikipedia article.
Well, that's the goal, yeah.
It's really, I mean, it's very compelling.
Well, thank
and
you.
yet, here's this guy, I mean, he's doing calculations in the book. It sounds like a recipe, as it were, for disaster, though.
Yeah, I was really worried about that. Finding that, fine line between like scientific accuracy and entertainment was rough because it was really important to me for it to be accurate. And I wanted to not just be accurate, but I wanted the reader had to understand these concepts to understand why these things are, life-threatening to the main character. And so I had to explain all of it, but also not be boring. And I'm the sort of dork, I can go way down the rabbit hole on this stuff and talk about all the history behind this part of the space program, that part, and it's all just fascinating to me. But, just because like, here's a triple integral for defining this and that and the other thing, it's very exciting to me. It's a very elegant equation. Doesn't mean the reader's going to like it. So it's all about just kind of like, okay, give them the minimum amount of information that they need without getting too boring, and then try to find a funny way to express it.
If you go to most sci-fi films, though, I mean, there's always a conflict of some sort, just as there is in your story, of course. But it's always overcome, almost always, not by intellect or reasoning or engineering or making these computations. It's always done with, I don't know, sword play usually, even though it's, the 24th century or whatever. They're still using swords. It's all by physical prowess.
Actually, if you're referring to Star Wars, I need to remind you that Star Wars takes place a long time ago.
Yeah, but
it actually takes place in the distant past.
Yeah, it just got to us today.
Inaccurate fun is not fun.
Oh, inaccurate fun. All right. I had to say, a friend of mine who saw the film,
The Martian.
The Martian,
okay.
Yes, before she read the book, said that when she read the book, all the monologue from Mark Watney, she heard Matt Damon's voice. Were you happy with Matt Damon's voice? Was he your guy?
Oh yeah, he absolutely nailed the role. I mean, he just perfectly portrayed Watney the way I imagined him. It was excellent.
Yeah. I think the movie cost something like $600 million.
No, it cost $109 million. It made $600 million.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah, $600 million budget, that would be pretty steep for a movie.
Well, that's what I was going to say, but since you've now disappointed me. All right. Well, even 100. Well, obviously, you couldn't go to Mars on that budget and do the shooting there. Unless you've got some sort of skunkworks project that I don't know about. So where were the Mars scenes shot? I mean,
the exteriors were shot in Wadi Rum, Jordan. That's a desert in the country of Jordan.
Did you get to go?
They invited me, but I didn't go because I'm not a big fan of flying. Yes, I write about astronauts and I'm afraid of flying. So I could have gone if I'd wanted to, but I didn't. And the studio work was done in Budapest, at this gigantic studio in Budapest, and I also didn't go there. They also invited me there, yeah.
Well, that's too bad. I mean, I'm told that Isaac Asimov was not into technology. They offered him a personal computer kind of setup for his writing. He went back to his typewriter.
Oh, well,
So there you go. All right. Well, all right. Now, it seems to be that I mean, when I read it the first time, I said, this guy is really into the science and technology. We've been talking about that. But your training is not as a scientist, really, is it?
Well, no, not as a researcher. I was a computer programmer for 25 years.
Here in the Valley?
Mostly here in the Valley, although I spent a lot of time, I spent about 5 years in Boston. As well, yeah.
Okay, but you live a few blocks from NASA Ames Research Center.
I do, yeah.
Well, that was a resource for you, or not?
Nope. I didn't know anybody in aerospace when I was writing the novel, so all my research was just Google.
Really? I mean, I had this vision of you calling up somebody over there at NASA Ames, or maybe just walking in with a 5-minute walk, and just say, hey, look, I got this problem, that problem.
Yeah, no, it was all just lots and lots of research. Cool thing about, so it starts off with, I've had a huge interest in space flight, manned and unmanned space flight my whole life. So I've always been a space dork. So I started with a little bit more knowledge than the layman. I'm not an expert by any stretch, but I'm an enthusiast. And then the rest of it is just Googling. And that's pretty easy because the space industry, more than anything else, they love to share what they do. They love to, it's all very public. It's like, oh, here's how this engine works. Here's how this fuel works. Here's the specific impulse. Here's everything you ever needed to know about the Saturn V booster. Here's, everything. So it's not like other industries where there are a lot of trade secrets and stuff. So it was very easy to find that information.
Well, I was at NASA headquarters not too long ago and talking to a fellow by the name of Jim Green, who heads up their planet.
Yeah.
Well, and he had been, on the set of the movie. I mean, he was clearly a resource for making the film. You did it the hard way.
Yeah, well, I'm not 20th Century Fox. I can't just call NASA and say, hey, send me your director of planetary sciences.
All right. Now, Andy, this is a bit of a cheap shot, unlike all those expensive shots.
All the other ones, yes.
Right, exactly. But folks just love to criticize bad science in a film. Right? Or people who make a career out of that. I've tried. It doesn't work for me. But now, the list is actually quite small for The Martian.
Yeah, but there's
I say
a few.
that, not to flattery, but it's absolutely true. But one of the maybe the biggest problems is that your character's troubles all stem from a violent windstorm on Mars that blows things apart. And there's something wrong there, which I'm sure you know.
Oh, yes. The sandstorm that causes all the problems could not possibly happen. In real life, Mars does get 150-kilometer-an-hour sandstorms, but the atmospheric density on Mars is so thin, it's about 1/200th the thickness of Earth's atmosphere at sea level. So while it does get 150-kilometer-an-hour winds, it would feel like a 1-mile-an-hour breeze. It would have a tough time knocking over a piece of paper, let alone doing all this huge damage that they see in the movie and the book. I knew that was unrealistic at the time I wrote it. And in my defense, at the time that I wrote it, most people didn't know that it was unrealistic. I have unintentionally educated everybody that it's about Mars climatology because everybody's like, hey, this part of the movie's wrong. Everyone should know that. I knew it at the time. I decided to make that concession. I had a different idea, an alternate idea that would have been physically accurate, where they're doing an MAV engine test and there's an explosion and that causes all the problems. But it's a man versus nature story, and so I wanted nature to get the first punch in. So I went with the sandstorm.
There's a tip of the hat to nature in the sense that in the long shots there of Mars and the landscape, you see these little dust devils, right? And Mars does have dust devils.
Mars does have dust devils.
So that's right. Well,
also has lightning.
Yeah, was there lightning in the film? I don't.
There was. You didn't see it directly, but you could see it flashing outside. When they were in the hab and the storm was there, you could see flashes outside.
Really? Okay. Well, one of the biggest problems that Mark Watney faces on Mars, aside from the lack of diverse entertainment options, is food, right? He chooses an all-carb diet. Tell me how he decides, because he doesn't have enough food to last until they can rescue him.
Right. The next manned mission to Mars is going to be, initially, it's going to be something like 4 years away. And he's like, well, I can't survive that long. His mission was aborted after a short period of time, so they have 6 people worth of food for about a month, which should last him 6 months. There was some redundancy food sent. He can cut his rations. So he has about a year worth of rations. So he needs to find a way to survive the rest of the time beyond that. And so what he finds is he has some whole potatoes that are still viable. They're still alive. They were sent as, it was originally going to be a Thanksgiving meal for the crew that they could prepare, together on Mars because their mission overlapped Thanksgiving. And so he had some potatoes. And he's a botanist, so he's pretty good at knowing how plants work. And he brought in Martian soil and then, and planted the potatoes. And he had to use his own waste as fertilizer because it's, the great circle of life. Then he had some problems making enough water to grow all those potatoes, and that was a whole different subplot.
Yeah, but he figures out how to do that chemically, right?
Yeah, he has leftover rocket fuel from the descent vehicle that they took. So there's the MDV, which is the ship they landed on Mars with, still had a few hundred liters of fuel. And so and that's hydrazine fuel, which is this incredibly volatile, dangerous compound. And he figured out how to just run it over a catalyst and liberate the hydrogen. And then he took carbon dioxide from outside with a special compressor pump that he had. So he could get tanks of carbon dioxide, bring them inside, and run it through the life support system, which strips the carbon off of carbon dioxide to liberate the oxygen, because that's what it's for. It's called the oxygenator. And so he can turn Martian atmosphere into oxygen, and he can turn the rocket fuel into hydrogen, and then he burns them together to make water.
Okay,
H2O.
Yeah, but I hope the viewers will we'll give them a test on that later.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as they're being technical, there's something else about the Martian soil, the regolith.
Regolith,
it's
yes.
occasionally called.
You're not technically only Earth has soil. Technically, dirt anywhere else, on the Moon or Mars or Pluto or anything is all regolith.
Regolith.
But I called it soil all throughout the book, and no one could stop me.
Well, the thing is that the Martian regolith has a lot of this oxygen-rich compound known as a perchlorate in it. And I've heard it said you'd have a really hard time growing anything in the Martian's regolith.
So I've gotten really conflicting reports on exactly what the perchlorates would do. Depends on how much are in the soil. If there's a huge amount of perchlorates in the soil, then plants just can't germinate at all. If there's a little bit less than that, then plants can grow, but they'll have perchlorates in them, and that makes them kind of poisonous. And if there's less than that, they'll grow, and the perchlorates won't matter. Turns out Mars's soil is most likely in that middle category, where the plants can grow, they'll have perchlorates in them. They're not great for you, but it's not like this sudden toxic death thing. It's more like they're bad for you in the same way that smoking is bad for you. It's like this long-term chronic exposure to it breaks down your health over time. And even if you account for all that, it's easy, very easy to wash perchlorates out of soil because it bonds with water. So if you just take your soil and you have excess water, you can rinse the soil and the perchlorates will come out.
All right, just wash the dirt and everything.
Wash the dirt.
Look, there are other technical things we could dwell on, but as noted, I think that's maybe missing the point. I mean, that's easy.
I love
that's
talking
fun
the
for the
tech
propeller
stuff.
heads, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but the overwhelming majority of what you write is accurate, and beyond that, the impact of the novel doesn't depend on these things anyway, does it? I mean, you're talking about going to Mars, and the impact of making Mars an interesting place strikes me as, that's the first order term in the equation. That's the big thing. And there have been people who have written, they've opined that this is what's going to actually get us to Mars, this interest in Mars that you've generated.
Well, that's very flattering. I think it's a little bit overstated. I think I'm one small part of a kind of virtuous cycle that's in place right now. There is a resurging public interest in manned spaceflight and the space program in general, and that is causing entertainment, like Hollywood, to make more movies that relate to realistic space travel, like Gravity and The Martian. And then that, in turn, drives more public interest. And so it's like the opposite of a vicious cycle, right? It's a virtuous cycle, and it's going around and around, and it's good. And I think NASA got about $1 billion more funding this year than the last year, and that cycle is probably part of it because, of course, NASA funding is eventually it's based largely on public interest in space travel. So
if they give you 1% of that, that's not too bad.
Yeah, that'd be great. But no kickbacks from NASA for me, unfortunately.
Well, but I mean, this is a serious thing because, the National Academy of Sciences has looked into this, trying to figure out why kids, for example, go into science. And the overwhelming number one answer, if you will, the number one answer is some movie or TV show they saw. So it sounds to me like the impact of this could be very considerable.
Well, that'd be great if that's true.
Okay. Andy, writing novels wasn't your day job. You've already said that. You used to be, writing software. How did you come to live in Mountain View, though? I mean, you're not a South Bay native.
Well, I'm an East Bay native, so I'm not that far off. I grew up in Livermore. But I ended up in Mountain View because I got a job with, what was then Palm Computing, and then got bought by Hewlett-Packard. So then I found myself in the same cubicle, but brand new company, and then laid off from Hewlett-Packard because they realized that buying Palm was a huge mistake. And then I worked for a company called Mobile Iron, which is right down the street from where I live. So that was really convenient. Worked there for quite a while. I really liked that job, too. It was a great company to work for.
Are you still writing software?
No. I quit my day job to go full-time on fiction writing.
Well, I want to ask you about that. That reminds me of, I guess it was Robert Preston, who worked for, I think, General Electric, or right?
I'm not sure.
On the East Coast, whatever. And he wrote a book, and it sold 5,000 copies. He wrote another book and sold 5,000 copies. And then he decided to write a book that was about something, really dramatic and awful sounding. He called it The Hot Zone. It was about Ebola. That's when he quit his job. You've done the same.
Yeah, except for I got lucky enough that my hit was the first novel out of the gate for me. So I have one novel, The Martian.
Really? You hadn't written a novel prior to this?
Well, I haven't gotten a novel published prior to this.
Well, but you may have written one.
I wrote two previous novels. First one was really, really bad, and fortunately, I wrote it before kind of the era of the internet, so it never got out there in digital form. So no one will ever find that. The second one is, the second one actually I think called Theft of Pride. I think that has a good plot. I think it's a good story. It's just really badly written. I still had a lot to learn about just the actual wordsmithing, It just wasn't a good read.
Yeah, but I mean, with your, your sudden credibility here now, I mean, aren't people looking at that? Are you getting offers for options and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. But like, I would not try to publish Theft of Pride in its current form. It would be a complete rewrite. I mean, I think the beats of the story are really good, but I wouldn't try to say, oh, here it is. I wrote it already. There you go. Because it's not.
But you might do that if you're talking to a screenwriter.
Yeah. No, I could sell the film rights to Theft of Pride, sure, and it would because I think the plot is really good.
Well, that sounds like there's something you ought to consider. The enormous success of your work has radically changed your lifestyle, and yet, I've talked to you a couple of times, and you seem totally unassuming. Right. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but you don't seem to me that you're very much different than you would have been a year ago.
Oh, it's just like anybody else. In the evening, I sip my Chateau La Douche and have my designer cat and my elbow patch jacket. No, I don't know. I just don't. I was pretty content with my life beforehand, and now I'm still content with my life. I just have more money in the bank, I guess. I haven't even moved or anything.
Yeah?
I live in the same house.
And what about hobbies? How do you spend your free time? Is it writing all the time, or do you do something else?
So writing is now my job, right? For hobbies, I like to, I'm into cocktail mixing. I like mixology, stuff like that. And I like board gaming with my geek friends.
Really?
In fact, I usually board game on Monday nights, which is when we're taping this right now. And they're at my house gaming right now.
Well, listen, Andy, we've only got a few more seconds, but I got to ask you. What about your next novel? Everybody's awaiting that, right? I mean,
Sure.
The pressure's on, right?
Yep. I'm working on it now. It's probably going to come out in early 2017, and it's another realistic science fiction story, and it's about a city on the moon.
Fabulous.
And the main character is a woman.
I see. American?
No.
Okay.
She's Saudi, actually.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, now that I wouldn't have guessed. Well, unfortunately, that's kind of it. But, just to the viewers, you may be the first generation to actually get to another planet, and it's very likely to be the red planet. That will be a milestone, or maybe a 35 million milestone. And if it happens sooner, I think you can thank tonight's guest, Andy Weir. Also, thanks to our expert KMVT staff, in particular Bobby Chastain, our director, and our ever hard-working producer, Susan Hubbard. I'm Seth Shostak, inviting you to join us next month for Silicon Valley Buzz. Good night.